Whether you feel like it or not, we are the wealthiest generation ever to walk the earth. If you're a baby boomer like me, you've lived through an unbelievable improvement in living standards and technology that's changed our lives beyond anything our parents and grandparents could have imagined. But let me ask you this. If we're so wealthy and so smart, why do so many people struggle with money and investing? How come 2/3 of Brits have less than £1,000 in savings? Why do most people reach retirement with only 30,000 in their name? Why is billions of pounds left to rot in high street bank accounts, earning 0.1% a year when there are so many amazing investment opportunities out there? My name's Graham Rowan, and in this 4-part series, I want to show you how to make your money work. Given our national obsession with property, you might expect me to spend the whole series talking about one form of bricks and mortar or another. Well, you'd be wrong. Today we're going to look at an area of investing that might have you hiding behind the sofa or sticking your fingers in your ears. That would not be wise, because you'd be ignoring one of the biggest and most reliable wealth creators known to man, the stock market. Your first thought might be Gordon Gekko or the Wolf of Wall Street, but lots of ordinary folk have been making serious money on the stock markets for years. But like with any other form of investment, you need to know what you're doing if you're going to be successful. So I've pulled together some of the best stock market brains in the country to explain how the markets work and how we can take advantage of them. My name's Graham Rowan, and in this 4-part series, I want to show you how to make your money work. The stock market is, in a way, the cornerstone of the capitalist system. It allows people like you and me to own a small piece of the greatest companies on the planet in the form of shares. Whether you think Apple, Amazon or Marks & Spencer are the best brands to own a piece of, you don't even have to come to a physical market anymore. You can do it all online at the click of a mouse. And many of those shares pay you money called dividends just for holding them. It's no different to rent from a property, except you don't have to do any work for it. Or you can spread your risk by investing in funds that hold lots of shares in a particular country or sector. So grab a coffee, sit down and concentrate while I bring a parade of pundits into your living room. We'll be hearing from one of the rising stars who's making big waves in the investment world, Andrew Craig, economist and biotech expert Jim Mellon, and Money Week writer and precious metals expert Dominic Frisby. But first, we're here to meet one of Britain's leading stock market experts, Justin Urquhart Stewart, to find out why he believes we should use the stock market to make our money work. So Justin, a lot of the people watching us will think that bricks and mortar is the safe option and the stock market is the risky option. What would you say to that?
Well, it's another form of investment. There are lots of different investments around the world, and that's the great excitement. Good news, you've got so much choice. Bad news, you've got so much choice. No, property's a really good investment. But for instance, you've been in the stock market around the world over the past 10 years, and you've just had a nice broad investment of all the stock markets, you'd have made about 130% or something like that. Now, within that, there are some dogs where you'd have lost money, and there's some other others which have done really well. And, depending which country you're in, it could have done well or badly according to the currency. After all, we know what has happened to sterling. So we have to be very careful when you're looking at those things.
Okay, so if somebody's kind of new to stock market investing and wants to take advantage of the kind of numbers you've just talked about, how should they go about that?
Well, one of the simplest ways is you can go to someone who actually provides you with a fund, and a fund that's got a broad range of well-diversified assets, some of which would include actually property. But as well as that, it would include ordinary stocks and shares that people are familiar with, but there's stocks and shares all around the world in different areas, all the fixed interest bonds, but it could be commodities, gold, private equity, even hedge funds. Give you that broad selection right the way over, and cash, because that's something to invest in as well. And if you do that, then what that does is actually blend all of that so you get much more of an expected return. So it may sound quite dull in comparison to some of the rocket science where people try to get, shoot the lights out, but there's something good about having good, solid, steady returns. And if you can get 5, 6, 7% after all costs every year consistently, well, that doubles your money if it's 7% every 10 years. That, for your long-term pension money, is not bad.
Just to be clear, people can actually choose a fund where all that kind of diversification would happen. They don't need to become an expert in each of those areas you mentioned.
No, not at all. Obviously, you could try and have that expertise, but, for instance, we have to draw on a lot of expertise. How doing it with one person is almost impossible. But what you can do, though, is actually build what is almost an institutional portfolio, using things that the retail clients can't get hold of, and make something which is really cost-effective. Now, we have a blend of there's active managers who can be really good, but they're more expensive, but sometimes they're not very good. In fact, most of them aren't. And you have things called passives, like tracker funds. Now, they're not perfect, because they just track things, but they're very cheap. Actually, it's a blend of the two is actually quite good, and being able to use this range of assets, and you've got something which is more reliable, who'll give you a greater level of confidence as to what's going on, and give you quite a reasonable return. And if it's a bit dull, then, if you want to, you can turn up the juice a bit and have something which is the same thing, but a bit riskier, and give you a higher rate of return.
A lot of people are saying that we're heading for a big correction in the stock and bond market. So doesn't that suggest that this might not be the best time to be getting invested in the markets?
One of the great things about the stock market, there's a lovely old phrase, you go time in the market as opposed to timing the market. Actually what happens is, there's a lovely number I've got in my brain, which was Granny left you 100 quid 69 years ago, and she put it in the stock market. Well done her. What you got now after 69 years? Well, 9,000 quid. Actually, this time, Granny did exactly the same, but reinvested all the dividends, and they compounded over time. And you haven't got £9,000, or 20, or 50, or 100, you've got £180,000. Now, during that time, there have been crashes, there have been all sorts of things going up and down like a yo-yo. In the long term, it works. And even during my time here, when we set up 14 years ago, actually in that situation, we've had the odd crash and things like that, but during that time, people have been able to invest their money in a solid, steady way right the way through it.
Justin Urquhart Stewart, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
From one of the most experienced fund managers in the UK to one of its rising stars, I'm now going to meet Andrew Craig to get his take on investing in the stock market. So Andrew, the strategy you describe in your book is one of very broad diversification across a whole range of different assets, countries and currencies. What sort of results have you seen from that if you backtest that over the years?
So yeah, I mean, if you basically own all assets in all geographies inexpensively and tax effectively by using, for example, ISA products. So imagine you put £5,000 into that kind of account the day a child is born. So you're lucky enough to have somebody who can put, Aunt Agatha or whatever, can put £5,000 in. If you make roughly a 10% return, which is around about the kind of level you can aspire to with this approach to investment, truly, through the economic cycle, 55 years later, when that child can first legally retire, with no further investment other than that one payment of £5,000, they'll have nearly £1 million on their 55th birthday. That just 5,500, 61250 or whatever, however the maths work, 10%, 10%, 10%, up to 55, they'll have actually £945,000.
That is an astonishing return, and against the average pension fund of what, 30,000 these
exactly
days.
Right.
How do we have a crisis? It can only be that they're not investing in the right way.
Because I think far too many people wake up and start thinking about investment when they're probably in their 40s. Some people don't even start at that point, and the huge advantage of having investment is the tortoise beats the hare. And if you start very, very early and you have lots and lots of years to compound those returns, that's when you get big pots of money. And most of the people who become truly wealthy in history have done it that way, rather than kind of overnight.
But you talk there about Aunt Agatha with that one-off investment. I think in the book you also go on to talk about a process you call automatic wealth. Do you want to just explain that a bit?
I think automation is really important, and psychologically, if you think in terms of spending 90% of your income every month, this month I'm going to spend 90% of my income on whatever it is that I love and I enjoy, going out for meals, cinema, whatever it might be. That leaves you 10% to save. If you think, I'm going to try and save 10%, it's actually really hard, but psychologically, psychologists call it reframing. If you think, I'm going to spend 90%, but I'm going to automate the 10% that's left over every month into an ISA account or a pension account, or whichever one suits you, depending on how old you are, into very simple, globalized assets, then those are the sort of, over time, that 10% of whatever you earn becomes a habit. So you can up it to 12 or 15 as you get older and you get paid a bit more, and you will end up with a 7-figure sum in your kind of late 50s if you do that.
Fantastic. And do you think any of the sort of scare stories around potential crashes coming, or the impact of Brexit and so on, does that change anything about this strategy?
I truly believe it doesn't. If you automate your investments, if the market's at 2,000 for the sake of argument, and it halves to 1,000, if you're investing every month, you'll have been investing all the way up to the 2,000, and then when it does crash the following month, you just close your eyes and put your fingers in your ears and buy in at 1,000, then 1,050, then 1,100, which is exactly what's happened to the S&P 500, the main American index, in the last decade. And so people who follow that approach don't really have to worry about crashes.
Okay, and also if you're doing this within something like an ISA or perhaps a SIP, then it's all going to be tax-free as well.
Well, particularly. For younger people, I always stay focused on an ISA if you're sort of less than about 40 years old, because I think that there are going to be big changes coming to the way our pension system works. But if you're kind of maybe 45 up to retirement, then you can probably still focus on pensions before ISAs.
Andrew Craig, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's interesting to see that Andrew broadly agrees with Justin Urquhart Stewart that the best way to stock market success is wide diversification in your portfolio. But there are other experts who think that the big money is to be made by specialising in certain sectors. So after the break, I'll be meeting Dominic Frisby to talk about gold mining stocks and Jim Mellon to talk about breakthrough biotech companies. I'll see you then. Before the break, we met with Justin Urquhart Stewart and Andrew Craig, both of whom recommend wide diversification in your stock market portfolio. In this part of the programme, I'm meeting Dominic Frisby and Jim Mellon, who take a different approach. They go for very deep knowledge in a specific sector to drive major returns on their investment. Having met with Justin and Andrew, there's a couple of terms I want to define just to make sure we're clear going forward. The first one is the price earnings ratio. This is the price you pay for a share divided by the dividends or earnings from that share. So if you pay £10 for the share and the earnings are £1 a year, you've got a PE ratio of 10. The higher the PE, the longer it'll take you to get your money back. It can be especially bad with technology shares where dividends are low and prices are driven to insane levels. We all have a great experience as users of Amazon, but investment analysts call it the river of no returns because when I last checked, it would take you 400 years to get your money back at current prices. The second thing I want to talk about is bond yields versus price. This is an area a lot of people get hung up on and it causes a lot of confusion. A bond is a loan to a government or a country or a company in return for interest payments, the yield or coupon. That's fixed at the start, so the higher the prices of the bond, the lower the yield becomes in percentage terms. So if you pay £100 for a bond that's paying you 2%, you get £2 a year. If the price goes up to £200, you're still only getting £2 a year. So now that is a 1% yield. That's why we have this bonkers situation where many bonds are now offering a negative yield, a guaranteed loss. If interest rates rise, prices of bonds come down. So if that same bond went down to £50, your £2 is now a whopping 4% yield. Historically, bonds have paid 5% or more on average. So if yields were to return to that level, prices would have to come crashing down from the bubble they've been in for nearly 40 years now. We've heard from a couple of experts about the benefits of wide diversification in the stock market. Now let's take a different approach. I'm meeting Money Week writer and precious metals expert Dominic Frisby to talk about taking an in-depth look at the gold mining sector. So Dominic, some of the experts we've spoken to have said that if you're going into the stock market, you should really diversify your portfolio as widely as possible. Now I know you've taken a different tack by getting a really deep knowledge in certain sectors like gold mining companies. Why have you done that and how's that worked for you?
Well, it wasn't a deliberate choice, it's just one of those things that kind of happened. But looking back, I now realise it's not that difficult to become reasonably expert in something, as long as you keep that area of focus fairly small. And gold mining is a fairly simple business. There is a certain amount of gold in the rock, you crush the rock, you break it up, and you extract a certain amount of gold. It's not rocket science. And so it's quite easy to become reasonably expert in a short amount of time. What is difficult is that mining is famously full of liars. Mark Twain said a mine is a hole in the ground with a liar standing next to it. What is much more difficult is separating the truth tellers from the, shall we say, spouters of the proverbial.
Okay, but whether they're telling the truth or not, they've had their shares have had a pretty rough time recently. Would you argue that kind of from here on in the only way is up?
Well, between 2011 and the end of 2015 was an utter disaster. Even like large big cap mining companies were down over 90%. It was a bear market like no other. Actually, they've had a fantastic 2016, or the first half of 2016 was very good, and some of the small cap companies were rising, 500%, and it was a really exciting time to be invested. And that's the nature of gold mining. It's a bipolar investment. It's either rich, 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 or disaster, disaster, disaster.
So if I'm a kind of conservative property investing kind of person wanting to come into this, how can I get involved without risking losing my share?
Well, I would only put small amounts of capital, speculative capital to work, particularly if you're playing with small cap companies. And the other way around it is to buy an ETF or a fund which has a basket of mining investments, and tend to go for the large caps because they're less volatile if you're scared of the volatility. And some of them do actually pay a dividend as well, which I know property investors will like and will understand. But that dividend is slightly dependent on the gold price. It goes up when gold is high and profits are good, and it falls when gold is down.
And I think you've got some of the finished product to show us.
I do. I'm standing here. Here we have a kilo bar. This is a kilo of gold. It's worth about £35,000, something like that. And they will have had to have processed about 200 tons of rock just to get that 1 kilo of bar. If ever a huge amount of wealth was compressed into a tiny space, there it is, and there's the reason to own gold. Why don't you hold it?
I will indeed. Thank you very much. I think I will mug you now.
No, you won't.
Many thanks, Dominic. So we visited Dominic Frisby, who's done so well from gold mining stocks, but there are other sectors you can look at as well. I'm here to meet Jim Mellon, who's an expert in the biotech sector. So Jim, thank you for inviting me into your home. Now earlier this year, I know you were quite vocal about enthusiasm for Brexit, and now we have got that result. What do you see as the reasons behind us wanting to leave the EU, and what do you think the impacts of that are for investors?
Okay, well the reason that people wanted to leave is not the reason that I wanted to leave. and that's primarily immigration and sovereignty. I don't regard those as important issues. I think we should have as many qualified immigrants as we can get, and sovereignty I don't regard as an important issue. But in terms of my own view, it's to do with the fact that the Eurozone, the common currency area, is likely to implode in the next 1 to 5 years. And I can't judge it obviously in terms of exact timing, but to me it's an economic certainty that will happen. And when it happens, it's like a boat going down. You don't want to be on the boat, you want to be in the lifeboat. And that's why I was keen that we should not be associated with that. It may happen actually before we actually leave the European Union, in which case it's kind of a moot point. And you know, it's a difficult thing, a referendum, because it's either yes or no. And my answer to this is quite nuanced. I think that the European Union project is a good project. There are many positives to it. But if you ask a question yes or no and you're forced to answer either way, then I kind of went for the no. So in terms of what investors should be thinking about that, well, it's thrown up a very cheap pound sterling, particularly against the euro. And I would say, and my friends who are really savvy in foreign exchange also echo that you should buy pounds now and not buy euros. So if you're contemplating buying somewhere in Spain now, I'd wait, because the pound will get stronger against the euro, maybe buy another 10%. And don't rush to buy anything, actually, because markets look pretty fully valued to me at the moment. And as for bonds, I'd sell all of them. They're all overvalued. You know, when you have yields that are either negative or just marginally positive, you're mad if you buy a bond.
Okay, well, an area you've been hugely successful in is biotech. If somebody is watching us thinking that they'd like to get into the biotech sector, what would be your thoughts on that? How do you suggest they go about it?
Well, my whole investment philosophy is driven by the idea that you have a big idea and it translates into a money fountain. And the biggest idea of all is our own longevity and our own health. Everyone knows that the world is getting older, particularly in the developed world. And as an example, the Japanese population now has more 75-year-olds than 14-year-olds, which is the first than under 14-year-olds, which is the first time it's ever happened in the history of the world. And those people require looking after. They require medication. They require hospitalization. And hopefully they're going to have a healthy life, a well-dily life rather than an elderly life. And all of those things play into the fact that biotech, pharmaceuticals, healthcare, robotic assistance, you name it, wearables, for health, is already a very large industry, but will undoubtedly be the fastest growing industry of any substance in the world in the next 100 years, I would say. And so the demographic factor plays to the big idea leading to the money fountain. And if you can really hone in on what are the best areas of that, and bearing in mind that it's an area fraught with danger, because it's a bit like mining. There's a lot of government intervention, there's a lot of capital that needs to be deployed, and there's a lot of failure. But if you can find, good access to information and to expertise and find the right investments, then I think there's no finer area to invest in. And that's why I wrote a book about it, and I'm writing another book about longevity at the moment. In fact, I'm going to start it next week.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Okay, Jim Mellon, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Graham.
I'm guessing today's programme may have made you a tad uncomfortable, especially if your comfort zone is bricks and mortar. And here we are talking about stocks and shares, where you don't even receive a paper share certificate these days. It's all done digitally. But my job is not to keep you in your comfort zone. My job is to show you how you can make your money work. And as I hope you've seen, there's more than one strategy for making serious money in the world's stock markets. The safest route is the wide diversification advocated by Justin Urquhart Stewart and Andrew Craig. But make sure the funds you're investing in really are diversified across the planet. Most financial advisors and company pension schemes will load you too heavily into the UK stock market because that's their comfort zone, and they don't really understand the wider investment world. Once you've got a bedrock of well-diversified funds in your portfolio, why not experiment with taking a deep dive into one or two specific sectors like gold mining stocks or breakthrough biotech companies? You can get many times your original investment back if you could just pick a few winners at the frothier end of your portfolio. My goal in this episode was to broaden your horizon beyond just property investing. Lots of people have made a fortune from the stock markets. Why not you? Why not now?